Welcome to a deep dive on software testing. We've got some really cool resources here, and we're going to be diving into two of the big approaches.
Yeah.
Static and dynamic testing.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area.
Oh, absolutely. And whether you're developer, project manager, or just curious about how software is made,
Right.
understanding these testing types can really be a game changer.
It really can.
So let's get right to it.
Absolutely.
What's the core idea behind static testing?
Well, static testing is all about analysis before execution.
Yeah.
So you're carefully looking at design documents, even those requirements specs,
Oh, wow.
all before you run a single line of code.
That's interesting.
And your source material highlights how this early scrutiny can catch potential problems when they're easier and cheaper to fix.
So it's kind of like having an architect look at blueprints before you build a skyscraper.
Yeah.
You want to catch those design flaws before you pour all that concrete.
That's a great analogy. And the source material goes even deeper. It outlines specific techniques like code reviews, walkthroughs, inspections, and using static analysis tools.
Interesting.
And these aren't solo activities.
Yeah.
They often involve a whole team working together to find the best solutions.
So let's break down some of those techniques a little bit.
Sure.
What happens during a code review, and how does that actually improve the software?
So in a code review, developers will come together sometimes in person, sometimes virtually,
Yeah.
and they go through each other's code line by line.
Wow.
They're looking for potential errors, yeah, of course.
Right.
But it goes beyond just bugs.
Right.
They're checking for things like coding standards, making sure the code is clear and easy to understand, and even looking for ways to make it more efficient.
So it's kind of like having a fresh pair of eyes on your work.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can be so close to the project, you miss those obvious things.
Exactly.
And I imagine this is especially helpful for new developers who are still learning the ropes.
Oh, absolutely. It's a fantastic way to share knowledge, mentor junior developers, and ensure everyone is on the same page in terms of best practices.
Yeah.
Plus, finding and fixing errors at this stage can save a project from major headaches down the road.
Yeah, for sure. And the source material even mentions a company who was able to reduce their defect rate by something like 60%.
Wow.
Just by implementing those code review processes.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, pretty incredible. But it makes you wonder if code reviews are so effective.
Right.
Why even bother with other kinds of testing?
Well, that's where the limitations of static testing come in.
Okay.
It's really good at catching certain types of errors,
Yeah.
but it can't simulate how the software will actually perform in the real world.
Right.
You might have perfect code on paper,
Yeah.
but there could still be issues that only emerge when it's actually running, interacting with users, data, and other systems.
It makes sense. You can check a blueprint all you want,
Yeah.
but you won't know for sure if the plumbing works until you turn on the water.
Exactly.
And that brings us to dynamic testing.
Right.
But before we get into that, I think it's worth highlighting some of the advantages of static testing.
Okay.
What are some of the biggest wins teams get from focusing on this early stage of analysis?
I think the early detection of defects is a major benefit.
Yeah.
Finding and fixing those bugs early can save so much time and money later.
For sure.
And because you're not actually running the software yet,
Yeah.
static testing doesn't require a fully functional system, which means you can integrate it into the development process very early on.
And that early feedback can be so valuable, especially if you're working on tight deadlines or projects with requirements that are always changing.
Right.
Plus, static testing can help teams build a more robust code base right from the start.
Absolutely.
It's not just about finding those bugs, it's about building better software overall.
It really is. It's about proactively preventing vulnerabilities and making sure the code is clean, readable, and follows best practices. And that reduces the risk of errors, but also makes the software easier to understand and modify in the future.
So we've got a good grasp on static testing and why it's so important.
Yeah.
Now let's shift gears and dive into dynamic testing,
Okay,
where we actually get to see the software in action.
let's do it.
Okay, so we've talked about scrutinizing the blueprints with static testing. Now it's time to fire up the engines and see how this software actually performs out in the real world.
Right. That's where dynamic testing comes in.
Exactly. With dynamic testing, we're executing the code, feeding it inputs, and observing how it behaves.
Okay.
It's all about understanding the software's functionality, performance, and how it handles different situations.
And the source material actually breaks down several different types of dynamic testing.
Right.
It's a pretty comprehensive list, and I think some of these distinctions can get a little confusing.
Yeah.
Let's focus on a couple of key techniques that stand out.
Sure.
Maybe ones that would be especially relevant to someone working on, say, a complex web application. Absolutely. If we're talking web apps, Integration testing is a great place to start.
Okay.
This is where you make sure that all the modules, components, systems that make up the app
Right.
are all working together seamlessly.
So it's not just about making sure each individual piece of code works on its own.
Right.
It's about making sure they all play nicely together.
Exactly.
Kind of like making sure the engine, transmission, and brakes in a car
Yeah.
all work together so the car can actually drive.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Think about a web app with user accounts, a shopping cart, a payment gateway, and maybe even some social media integration.
Yeah.
Integration testing would involve testing all of those different systems interacting with each other,
Okay.
making sure the data is flowing correctly and that there aren't any unexpected conflicts or errors.
And I imagine this type of testing is even more critical for web applications
Yeah.
because you're dealing with so many external factors.
Right.
Different browsers, operating systems, network speeds,
Absolutely.
you name it.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to another crucial type of dynamic testing for web apps.
Yeah.
Performance testing.
Huh?
This is where you put the app through its paces
Right.
to see how it handles heavy loads, lots of users, and different network conditions. You want to make sure it doesn't slow to a crawl or crash during peak traffic times.
It's almost like stress testing the app to find its breaking point.
Yeah.
And I imagine this is particularly important for businesses that rely heavily on online sales
Right.
or have a global user base.
Absolutely.
Nobody wants to lose customers because their website can't handle a sudden surge in traffic.
Exactly. Performance testing can help identify bottlenecks,
Yeah.
optimize resources, and ultimately make sure the app is scalable and reliable.
Okay.
And it's not just about the raw performance either. It's
Wow.
also about the user experience.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah.
You can have an app that technically performs well,
Right.
but if it's slow to load or the interface is clunky, users are going to get frustrated and go elsewhere.
Precisely. That's why performance testing often goes hand in hand with usability testing,
Okay.
where you observe real users interacting with the app to see how intuitive it is, how easy it is to navigate, and whether they encounter any roadblocks.
Yeah.
This kind of feedback can be really valuable for making improvements
Okay.
and ensuring the app meets the user's needs and expectations.
It sounds like there's a lot more to dynamic testing than just checking if the code works.
Yeah.
It's about understanding how the software performs in the real world,
Right.
how it interacts with users, and how it handles all those different scenarios.
Absolutely.
But just like with static testing, I'm guessing there are some limitations
Yeah, there are.
to what dynamic testing can uncover.
You're right. While dynamic testing is really important for catching runtime issues and evaluating performance,
Yeah.
it's not a silver bullet.
Okay.
It can be time-consuming,
Right.
resource-intensive,
Yeah.
and it may not catch every single problem, particularly those related to security vulnerabilities or underlying design flaws
Right.
that might not manifest during testing.
So it sounds like both static and dynamic testing have their strengths and weaknesses.
They do.
It's not about choosing one over the other.
Right.
It's about understanding when to use each approach
Exactly.
and how they can work together to create a really great software product.
That's a key takeaway. Your source material even provides a helpful table that summarizes the key differences
Okay.
between static and dynamic testing.
Right.
And it highlights the different stages where they're applied, the types of defects they're best at detecting, and the overall goals they're trying to achieve.
That's a great point. Having a clear understanding of those differences
Yeah.
can really help development teams make informed decisions about their testing strategies.
For sure.
But even with that table,
Right.
it can still be tricky to know which approach is best suited for a particular situation.
Yeah. I agree.
So how do we know when to use which type of testing? It seems like there's a lot to consider.
Yeah, there's no one-size-fits-all answer. But if we think back to the e-commerce website example from the source material,
Right.
it helps to show how static and dynamic testing
Uh-huh.
play those important roles at different stages of development.
Right. That example really helped me understand.
Yeah.
So let's say we're building a brand new e-commerce website
Okay.
from scratch.
Yeah.
Where would static testing fit in?
Even before you start writing any code,
Okay.
static testing can be used during the requirements and design phases.
Okay.
You review those documents for completeness, consistency,
Right.
potential issues.
Yeah.
Then, as the code is being written,
Yeah.
you can do those code reviews, walkthrough,
Right.
static analysis tools
Yeah.
to make sure the code quality is good.
Yeah.
It adheres to security standards,
Right.
and that helps with early detection of vulnerabilities.
So you're catching things like SQL injection risks or logical errors in the shopping cart
Exactly.
before they even become problems.
Right.
That's really cool.
And then as the different components of the website start coming together,
Yeah.
the user accounts, the product catalogs, payment processing, that's where integration testing is really important.
Okay.
You want to make sure all those pieces are talking to each other correctly.
Yeah.
The data's flowing smoothly between them.
And once you have a website that actually works,
Right.
that's when you really start the dynamic testing, right?
Exactly.
Simulating user traffic,
Yeah.
testing payments, making sure the site can handle those Black Friday surges.
Absolutely. You want to know how the website performs under pressure,
Right.
how it responds to users,
Yeah.
and whether it can handle all that traffic.
In usability testing, too.
Of course.
Getting that feedback from real users.
Right.
It sounds like both are essential for building a successful e-commerce site,
They are.
or really any software.
Yeah. That's the main takeaway. These two approaches work best when they're used together.
Yeah.
They complement each other's strengths and help create a truly great product.
This deep dive has been amazing. I feel like I have a much better understanding of these two approaches to testing now.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. And as you continue to explore the world of software,
Yeah.
think about the apps you use, the websites you visit.
Right.
Static and dynamic testing are working behind the scenes to make sure those systems are secure, functional, and reliable.
What a great point to end on. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for sharing your expertise.
My pleasure.
We hope you learned something new and that it sparked your interest to learn more about software testing.
Yeah.
Until next time, happy testing.
Happy testing.